Have you noticed how tensions can rise so quickly in our communities over political issues? It's like one moment everyone's having a peaceful discussion and the next things escalate into chaos and disrespect. Recently, we've seen a surge in pro-Palestine protests across Canada, and I have to say, some of the images coming out of these demonstrations are extremely disturbing. We're seeing Canadian flags being burned, hateful chants like "Death to Canada," and a general atmosphere of disrespect toward the country and its values. As someone who values freedom of speech and peaceful assembly, it's hard not to feel a sense of unease when I see this kind of behavior. It's not just about the Palestinian cause, it's about the way these protesters are choosing to express themselves and the message they're sending to the rest of Canadian society. These demonstrations are taking place in our cities, on our streets, and outside our government buildings. They're impacting our communities, and it's time we took a closer look at what's really going on and ask why the Liberal and NDP governments are just ignoring what has been happening over the past couple of weeks. From burning the Canadian flag while chanting "Death to Canada,"
"Death to Canada! Death to the United States! And death to Israel!"
to the destruction of McGill buildings. And you have to ask, where are the law enforcement officers and why are these terrorists not being arrested? And why are they even here? When Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre asked Liberal member Mélanie Joly if she would denounce these protesters' actions, she refused to do so on 3 separate occasions and ended up having Poilievre banned from speaking in the House of Commons. The Israel-Palestine conflict has been ongoing for decades, and it's an issue that resonates deeply with many people in Canada. Canada has a large Jewish population, as well as a significant number of people from Middle Eastern and North African backgrounds. This diversity of perspectives is what makes Canada so strong, but it also means that we have a responsibility to engage in respectful and nuanced discussions. There are many Canadians who strongly identify with the Palestinian cause and who feel that their voices aren't being heard. At the same time, there are also many Canadians who are deeply concerned about the actions of the Israeli government and who feel that criticism of Israel is often unfairly labeled as anti-Semitic. These are complex issues, and it's essential that we approach them with sensitivity and respect. The pro-Palestine protests we're seeing in Canada are not just about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they're also about the kind of society we want to build here in Canada. As we dive deeper into the main points of this commentary, I want to start by highlighting the significance of these protests. What are they really about, and what messages are being conveyed? Are these protests truly about supporting the Palestinian people, or is there something more sinister at play? Let's take a closer look at what's happening on the ground. We're seeing protesters waving Palestinian flags, chanting slogans like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and engaging in violent clashes with police. We're seeing Canadian flags being burned, and we're hearing calls for the destruction of Israel. These messages are not only offensive to many Canadians, they're also deeply divisive. They're creating a sense of us versus them, where anyone who disagrees with the protesters is labeled as a racist or an Islamophobe. The reactions from the public and the authorities have been mixed. Some people are speaking out against the protests, while others are defending the right to free speech. There are those who are calling for tougher laws to crack down on hate speech, while others are arguing that this would be a violation of our fundamental rights. As I analyze the footage and news reports coming out of these protests, I'm struck by the sense of entitlement that some of the protesters seem to have. They're convinced that they're fighting for a noble cause and that anyone who gets in their way is somehow less human. We're seeing this entitlement play out in the way that some protesters are using intimidation and harassment to silence their opponents. We're seeing it in the way that they're using hate speech to dehumanize their enemies. And we're seeing it in the way that they're using violence to get their point across. I don't know about you, but I think that if they're Canadian, they all need to be arrested, and if they're not Canadians, they all need to be deported. This is not the Canada I was born in, and it sickens me to see how it has become this mess of disrespectful tyrants and ungrateful immigrants disregarding everything Canada represents. One of the most disturbing aspects of these protests is the way that they're being fueled by misinformation and conspiracy theories. We're seeing protesters spreading false narratives about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and about the role of Canada in the Middle East. These conspiracy theories are not only divisive, they're also dangerous. They're creating a sense of paranoia and mistrust, where people are no longer able to engage in rational discussions. As I look at the big picture, I'm struck by the importance of upholding our values of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and respect for diversity. These values are what make Canada strong, and they're what set us apart from other countries. However, I also believe that these values come with responsibilities. We have a responsibility to engage in respectful discussions, to listen to opposing viewpoints, and to avoid hate speech and misinformation. Some people will argue that the protests are justified, that they're a necessary response to the injustices faced by the Palestinian people. Others will argue that the protests are an attack on Canadian values and that they're being fueled by hatred and intolerance. I believe that the truth lies somewhere in between. The pro-Palestine protests are a complex issue, and they require a nuanced and balanced approach. We need to be able to distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitic hate speech. We need to be able to distinguish between peaceful assembly and violent rioting, and we need to be able to engage in respectful discussions, even when we disagree. In the end, it's up to each one of us to decide what kind of society we want to build in Canada. Do we want a society where people are free to express themselves, but also respectful of others? Or do we want a society where hate speech and intimidation are the norm? I hope this video has given you a lot to think about. The pro-Palestine protests are a complex issue, and they require a lot of thought and reflection. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the protests are justified, or do you think they're an attack on Canadian values? Let me know your thoughts, and be sure to check out another video of mine discussing related topics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.